Nigeria, and particularly to this special webinar. Before we proceed in this program, we'd like to all hold for the national anthem. Can we take the national anthem briefly before we proceed in the program? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Once again, I'd like to welcome you to the Institute of Directors, Nigeria. My name is Sunday Adenipekun, and I am the Director of Academy for the Institute. It's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome all of us to this special webinar on energy transition in Nigeria. And you will all agree with me that when we talk about energy these days, it is an issue that affects everybody and all organizations across all sectors. But more importantly, we're going to be talking about transition of it from one mode to the other. And I'll leave that to the main discussion, when we are into the program proper. At this juncture, I'd like to introduce the personalities on this program, and it's my pleasure to first and foremost introduce the chief host of this program in the person of Dr. E.J. Jidema, the President and Chairman of the Governing Council of the Institute of Nigeria. You are welcome, man. And
Thank you.
The host on this program is Mr. Victor Eromosele, FIOD, and the Chairman of the Energy and Power Committee of the Institute. Sir, you are most welcome, sir. We are highly privileged, on this program today to have the Vice President, His Excellency, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who is ably represented by Engineer Abubakar Ali Dapshima, the Director of Renewable and Rural Power Access, Renewable and Rural Power Access Department in the Ministry of Power. Sir, you are welcome to this program. And we have on the program today our very, very admirable member of the Institute, in the person of Mrs. Audrey Jo Ezigbo, who will be playing the role of the moderator in today's program. She's going to be moderating the program as we get along. Ma, you are welcome. It's a pleasure to welcome you on this program. And of course, today we are going to be have this advantage of having insights from a panel of well-experienced professionals who will be talking to issues on this particular subject of energy transition. And we have on the program Dr. Ransom Owen, MIOD, is the group managing director, Power Infrastructure and I2 Group. It's my pleasure to welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And of course, we have, as part of the panelists, Mr. Afolabi Akinrogunde. Mr. Akinrogunde is the CEO of All On Energy. Sir, you are welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Afolabi Akinrogunde. I was acting CEO, still investment manager at All On, but it's a pleasure to be here to speak with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you so very much, sir. We have on the panel very, very important personality, Mrs. Folake Soetan, MIOD. She is the CEO of Ikeja Electric PLC. Madam, you are welcome. It's good to have you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much.
And of course, I would like to introduce to us Mr. Olakunle Williams. Mr. Olakunle Williams is the CEO of Tetraco Energy Group. You are welcome, sir. Excellent. At this juncture, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we're going to kickstart, the program proper by having a few minutes opening remarks from the chairman, Energy and Power Committee in IOD Nigeria. And that's no other person than our own Mr. Victor Eromosele, FIOD. Sir, it's my pleasure to welcome you to take the opening.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, sir.
So without much ado, let's get started. I have His Excellency Professor Yemi Osibanjo, Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, ably here represented by the Director, Renewable and Power Access, Engineer Abubakar Ali Dapshima.
Thank you so very much. You're welcome, sir.
Welcome. President and Chairman of Council Institute of Directors, Nigeria, Dr. AJ Chetima, past presidents, members of the Council of the Institute, members of the Energy and Power and distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. In my capacity as Chairman of the Energy and Power Committee, EPC, it is my pleasure to say a few words by way of opening remarks. This event has been in the works for several months, and we are glad we finally pulled it through. It is coming exactly 9 months since our first webinar this year on the PIA. As promised then, that webinar was followed by a position paper on Petroleum Industry Act, which was warmly received by the authorities. In the intervening 9 months, we will agree that the world has changed. Most noteworthy has been the Russian-Ukraine war. It has changed the voice pitch of the Western world and the rhetoric around an inevitable energy transition. As Europeans, we stabbed Russian oil and gas in retaliation for imposed sanctions. Amid myriads of extreme weather events, if you like, you can call it climate change. Nigeria is currently experiencing its worst floods, more accurately, deluge in a decade, with more than 600 dead, 200,000 homes destroyed, and over 1.4 million persons displaced. It really does not matter who the greenhouse or GHG emitters are. Sooner or later, we all will become victims in one way or the other. As Africa hosts the UN COP27 in Egypt this weekend, over the next 2 weeks, the timing of this IOD event could not have been more auspicious. Energy transition is not only topical, but the journey to decarbonization has become a subject captains of industry and directors cannot really afford to be agnostic about. Nigeria, a few weeks ago, launched its Energy Transition Plan, ETP. We at least know that faithfully executing the plan will not be cheap. It will run into billions of dollars and perhaps trillions of dollars. We are glad that the sponsor of the plan, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osibajo, ably represented here by Engineer Ali Dapshima, is here to actually, we'll hear him out to give us some insight into this plan and how it's going to be executed. And I know he's been going around the world. I'm sure we're getting enough money to fund this very ambitious plan. But more importantly, we're interested in how does this plan connect with power. Nigeria is still power deficient relative to its population. We have 200 million people out there who, and the majority of them don't even have access. And so we're quite glad that Dapchi, who is in charge of ensuring that people have access, is actually the one representing here the Vice President. But after his address, after the keynote address, we will have the pleasure of listening to a very distinguished panel of discussants and experts who will examine what I call a very troubling subject: resolving power sector challenges and achieving SDG 7 commitment amid energy transition. SDG 7, by the way, means power for all by 2030. At this point, may I introduce the President and Chairman of Council Institute of Directors of Nigeria, Dr. Mrs. Ije Chedinma, to deliver the address of welcome. Welcome, Madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eromosele. I'm very glad that today has come because our Energy and Power Committee has consistently done us proud. Our keynote speaker, His Excellency Professor Yemi Osibanjo, SANGCON, the Vice President, Federal Republic of Nigeria. We are glad to have you in this webinar. We are just basking in the light of your contributions during the recent Women Directors Development Program, where you spoke powerfully. We are glad to have your representative, Engineer Abubakar Ali Dapshima, Director, Renewable and Rural Power Asset Development. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
We have the Chair of Energy and Power Committee of IOD, Mr. Victor Eromosele, FIOD. Our moderator, Mrs. Audrey Jo Ezigbo, MIOD, who has been introduced by the Director of Academy, and our panelists, Dr. Ransom Owan, MIOD, Mr. Lakunle Williams, Mrs. Folake Shoeton, and Mr. Afolabi Akinrogunde. Thank you very much for accepting to be part of this webinar. I know you have been properly introduced by the Director of Academy. So without waste of time, distinguished past presidents and elders of IOD and members of the Governing Council and Executive Committee of the Institute, office holders, I know I have able support from my colleagues, the first Vice President, Alhaji Tijani Borodo, the second Vice President, Mr. Oyetunji, and the Honorary Treasurer, Legal Advisor, and immediate past President. Fellows and members of the Institute of Directors, captains of industries, gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pleasure that I join the chairman of the Energy and Power Committee of the Institute of Directors to welcome you all to this stakeholders forum with the theme, Energy Transition and the Power Sector. I especially commend the Energy and Power Committee of the Institute led by Mr. Victor Eromosela, FIOD, for organizing this webinar at this auspicious time. As he rightly said, it is great to bring stakeholders together to discuss this very important and critical point in our developmental journey. The issue of energy transition has remained central to countries across the globe since the Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals 2030 and the Paris Climate Change Agreement were adopted in 2015. Currently, the Nigerian power sector is faced with several challenges. As things stand, the country has the potential of generating up to 12,522 megawatts of electric power, but supplies approximate to 4,000 megawatts. To say that this is insufficient for the population of over 200 million is an understatement. There is an obvious need to diversify our source of energy, particularly in areas where we are richly and divinely gifted, such as the solar energy. We also expect to benefit from the infrastructure support for least developed countries, as stated in the Sustainable Development Goal 7. You are all witnesses of the consequences of climate change. The consequences are grave, and they're here with us. Just recently, across the country, there was flooding all over, leading to massive loss of agricultural products and means of livelihood. We need to mitigate this, as it also complements efforts in the sustainability areas. Distinguished directors, ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to have the voice or have as our keynote speaker His Excellency Professor Yemi Osibanjo, Vice President of Federal Republic of Nigeria. We also have a notable industry player, our very own Mrs. Audrey Ezigbo, who doubles as the Vice Chairman, Energy and Power Committee, as our moderator. We have our well-selected panelists, who each will do justice to the theme. I am confident that they would bring their experience to bear at this forum while preferring solutions that would not only help tackle the current power sector challenges, but also identify the needed strategic partnerships and collaborations required to unlock investments that would promote the development of the economy. On behalf of the Governing Council of the Institute, I thank you all for joining us at this event and for accepting to play the various roles. Our institute remains committed to the principles of good governance, we are relentless in our advocacy for the development of a vibrant economy and ethical society that supports sustainability initiatives, of which energy transition is one. We must build on our future readiness through having oversight on sustainability embedded in our strategic plans. Finally, let me commend once more the Energy and Power Committee led by Mr. Victor Eromosele, as well as the DG and the Secretariat of the Institute of Directors for organizing this event. Thanks also to all the members of the Governing Council and the ESCO and their guests for attending. Your Excellency, distinguished directors, leaders, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to participate actively at this webinar and take advantage of the enormous wealth of experience our panelists and the moderator bring on board, and be ready with your questions and contributions. Enjoy the event. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Very well said. So we've laid down the foundation for building what will be a very nice webinar, and we have all seated and ready to fire on. Now, in the next 30 minutes or thereabout, less than that actually, 20 minutes, we hope to listen to Engineer Abubakar Ali Dapshima, Director, Renewables and Rural Power Access, as he speaks to the topic, Energy Transition in Nigeria, Progress Made, Challenges Ahead. Over to you, Engineer Abubakar.
Thank you so much, my directors, for having me on this program. And I am here representing His Excellency Professor Yemi Osibanjo, the Vice President, who is supposed to be represented because of the exigencies of office. They asked me to represent them. And here I'm going to read the speech of His Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osibanjo, as follows. Being today, 3rd November, 2022. The topic as follows, of course, energy transition and power. So I am also standing on the existing protocol, please. So I'm going to read His Excellency's speech to the board of, to the Institute of Directors. I am delighted to attend the Institute of Directors Energy Forum and speak on energy driven by the need to reduce mitigating the effect of climate change, the of services by which the quality of life is enhanced. Historically, the world has transited from less efficient to more efficient energy sources. The erstwhile energy transitions through fuel wood to coal to oil and more recently to natural gas were prompted by efficient and were less deliberate. However, the present energy transition is deliberate and is driven by the urgent need to tame global warming. Energy Transition Plan, ETP, conceived and recently launched by the federal government of Nigeria, provides clear pathway, a set of action necessary to achieving the net zero carbon dioxide emission by the year 2060, in tandem with His Excellency Mr. President Declaration at Conference of Parties, COP26, with a goal of lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty and driving economic growth. The energy sector as of global emission percent of energy sector emissions. Therefore, the achievement of net zero emissions and climate resilience pathways requires implementation of the Energy Transition Plan, ETP. In a brief, the implementation of the ETP will entail as follows. A, shifting all our industrial energy consumption to electricity instead of direct using the primary energy sources for industrial processes. Initially, the electricity will come from natural gas, which will later be replaced with renewable power. The implication of this is that in a short term, emission might increase with high utilization of natural gas for power, but will it decrease in long term as renewable energy replaces fossil fuel derived electricity. B, mass transportation will transit firstly through oil to use of compressed natural gas, CNG, and ultimately to electricity-based transportation in the long term. Integrating natural renewable energy derived from solar, small and medium hydro power into the electricity energy mix of the nation. The financial implication of implementing ETP will require additional $410 billion in excess of business as usual spending in the Nigerian economy and $100 billion annually. E, at least 30% increase in gas commercialization by the year 2030, driven by liquefied natural gas, LPG, penetration from clean cooking and gas to power. However, the gas commercialization will fall by 50% by the year 2060, driven largely by decreasing global fossil fuel demand, increasing contribution of renewable energy power, and shift to carbon neutral cooking. F, our centralized power capacity to reach circa 200 gigawatts by the year 2060, of 90% renewable power, a total decentralized power capacity of approximately 3 gigawatts of solar photovoltaic and approximately 12 home systems through implementation of a range of emission reduction technologies. Plus carbon capture utility in cement production industry. Nigeria recognizes the climate change contributions have become a major factor in national development, and that is why I am highly delighted about this forum, which has provided the needed platform for robust discussions of issues bordering on energy transition and the power sector amongst stakeholders in the country. This is with a view to providing solutions that will reshape the energy and power sector to conform to global standards in line with the challenges of the 21st century. In conclusion, I wish to reiterate the federal government's emission reduction and climate change mitigation in Nigeria. I must also state that this daunting task cannot be accomplished by the government alone. Therefore, there is need for effective collaboration among all stakeholders in order to surmount these daunting challenges. Accordingly, I wish to once again for this forthright platform for robust deliberation on energy transition and power sector in Nigeria. It is my hope that at the end of this forum, the outcome will yield the desired result on the way forward. Celebrations. Thank you very much. That's the speech of His Excellency for listening to His Excellency, the Vice President. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for that wonderful address, which is very well done and well timed. Clearly, there's need for us to conform with global standards in line with 21st century demands. But how quickly Nigeria does so will be a different problem. But most importantly is that, like most Nigerians will feel, is that power we shouldn't be having, like the president of the institute said, 5 gigawatts of power for a country with 200 million people growing at a rate of at least 3% every year. Clearly, we should be doing better than that. Over the years, plenty of effort has been devoted to it, and yet it's not rising to that level. And that's why in my speech, I talked about it as a troubling subject. Indeed, in my view, it is a troubling subject. Troubling in the sense that it's festering over the years. We've not been able to get out of it. And that is why we have to discuss the subject, resolving power sector challenges and achieving SDG 7 commitment amid energy transition as the next subject for discussion by a very well put together panel. And I will just simply, I'm not going to introduce them because we've done so. I've just asked the moderator. So in the next, I think we have here up till 4:15, including before we take our Q&A, to discuss this subject. And over to you, Audrey Jo Ezigbo, who is the Deputy Chairman, Energy and Power Committee.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A very good afternoon to you all, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me, in the interest of time, to stand on all existing protocols. Now, we're not unfamiliar with the Africa energy poverty narrative and how that also transcends into the Nigerian narrative. Africa, as we know, is about 17% of the global population. And yet we're accounting for just about 3.1%, or about 26,000 terawatts of the electricity that is generated globally. And we're only consuming about 3.3% of that primary electricity. These are 2020 data. And it's therefore not surprising that we see challenges around developmental aspirations of the continent, because there is a clear link between the level of power and the level of development. And so, currently, as a whole continent, we're sitting only on about 6,000 kilowatts per year compared to what the world consumption average is, about 3,200. And of course, we're seeing also, as has been mentioned severally, that there are severe climate effects that we are seeing on the continent, and Nigeria has had a clear feel of that. Surprisingly, despite the decades of having conversations around fossil fuels, we still see that about 81% of the global energy mix is actually coming from fossil fuels, production and consumption of energy. And of course, in attendance with that, we have about 2/3 then of global greenhouse emissions coming from fossil fuels. Now, this is clear on the continent as we have seen over the years an increasing level of industrialization, urbanization. In the last few years also, we've seen a lot of undulations in the global market. So we've gone through COVID and all the attendant supply chain issues. We have gone into geopolitical shifts. We're seeing the current tensions in Ukraine. And there's a lot of shifts in the climate. So there's a lot of pressure around climate change policy, sustainability issues, and of course, social justice and change. There's just a lot of turmoil in the world. And it has its direct impact on global economic growth, energy security, and the like. So essentially, when we think about the energy landscape, what we can see clearly is that there is a shift, a redefining of the energy space, and a lot of reprioritization or reassessments of where investments are going. There is an estimation that globally, we have spent about 500 billion on energy transition issues as of 2020, as compared to just about 25 billion or 250 billion rather in 2010. So we see that a lot of investment is going that way. There's a lot of focus on the issue of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 7, that speaks to providing energy access for everyone, substantially increasing the level of renewable energy, and therefore doubling the rate of energy efficiency by 2030. So I came across a study, the PwC Africa Energy Review 2022, that says for Africa specifically, for us to be able to bring up Africa up to the world average for electricity access, and to be able to meet the decarbonization commitments and bridge this energy poverty gap, that Africa is going to need to arrange for an additional 2,354 gigawatts of renewable energy generation by 2050. This is about 40 times the current capacity. And therefore, Africa will be looking at spending about 2.6 trillion to be able to achieve that, which is actually the size approximately of our current GDP. Now, when we look at Nigeria, and listening to the comments from the Vice President and the whole energy transition plan conversation, we recognize that for Nigeria, we have a huge task that is ahead of us. A nation of 200 and something million people talking about just 4 gigawatts and still looking at a net zero target of 2060. How do we achieve this? The energy transition plan is supposed to help us to deliver on SDG 7 net zero by 2060. And there's a big focus on the power element. How do we increase that base load energy capacity? According to the estimations, we need about $1.9 trillion by 2060. How are we going to achieve this? And that's why this panel is therefore critical as we look at the issues of resolving the power sector challenges and achieving SDG 7 amid this energy transition narrative. So I'm going to come to my panelists and just ask a series of questions. I think we'll go around the panel the first time. I will ask you to keep your answers as sharp as possible so that we use our time well. And then at the end, we just do a bit of a wrap up. I want us to focus not on the challenges so much as speaking to actionable strategies that we can then as IOD put forward to the government to be able to resolve these issues and make sure that the credibility of our energy transition plan is guaranteed. And so Folake, I want to start with you. You are directly in that space as well. So we know that in advance of COP22, we came up with the energy transition plan and all that. And like I said, there's a big power issue there. However, even though we've privatized the power sector, we are almost a decade down the line, we're still seeing a lot of challenges. And so my question to you would be, to what extent then do you think that this energy transition plan is going to help to resolve some of these challenges? Recently we've been talking about partial activation. We saw some improvements in supply. Now we're not sure what is happening again. So is that power activation the game changer? How does it enable the objectives of the energy transition plan? Folake? You're still muted, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And it's actually my pleasure and honor to be on this panel and to be able to share practical and realistic insights as to how we can bridge the energy gap access or the energy transition target for 2060. I think you mentioned or you spoke about the partial activation. Now, the partial activation, as we all know, was a step in ensuring that all the sector players, all the DisCos sector players are aligned and are held accountable to ensure that there is improved energy access in Nigeria. And that started literally in July. And you would see that there has been some improvement with regards to the energy that we're seeing in Nigeria, even though we're not there yet, as we were today. And what are the reasons why we're not there? Or would I say, what should be the real focus for us with regards to this partial activation? The partial activation was focused on ensuring that everybody in the value chain is held liable, pretty much like a take-or-pay scenario, whereby there is transparency, we have access or we have visibility to see what the generating plants or the GenCos make available on the grid. And then, of course, we're also able to hold the transmission company that is responsible for wheeling this energy to the distribution companies, who are the ones that interface with the end user customers. And that brought about them also introducing what we call a situation room, where on a daily basis, we are reviewing and we're looking at the energy that was made available vis-a-vis what, for example, the DisCos have as an allocation. So each of the DisCos contracted allocation is made available on a daily basis. You nominate the energy that you're supposed to take from a DisCo perspective. The GenCos also show the their generation capacity and what they made available on the DisCo. And they're literally looking, like on a daily basis, at where there was a drop in ball. So who dropped the ball? Was it the GenCos that were not able to provide the power? If the GenCos were not able to provide the power on the grid, what is the reason for that? And what we've seen over the last couple of months is gas was a major issue as a reason why the GenCos were not able to provide the sort of level of energy that would allow the DisCos to be able to distribute effectively to the end user. A second one is, I'm sure you heard a lot of what we call the grid collapse. There was a lot of grid collapse in the last couple of months. And that obviously also contributed largely to being able to ensure that there is improved power to the end user. But ultimately, I think what has been established, or what is key, or what at least I have seen in the last 3 months, without focusing on the challenges, is that there is need for there to be critical investment in this sector. Critical investment is critical. So if you want us to be able today, generating capacity is over 12,000 megawatts. And if you are looking at that being able to wheel directly to the DisCos, you need to improve the infrastructure of the transmission company. You need to.
Right. I'm sorry, with we have a tight panel. I'm going to come back to you on this investment conversation, if you don't mind.
No problem.
I'm going to thank you so much. I'm sorry to have interrupted you.
That's fine.
I want to come to Olakunle now and ask you this question. That as we think about the energy transition plan and the imperatives for power, what are your perspectives from an energy security point of view? Like, what does this mean for Nigeria when we start thinking of the different parameters around energy security, and perhaps taking it into beyond the nation, looking at it more regionally or perhaps continentally? I mean, when we think about it, most, maybe not most, but a very sizable percentage of our population are still off grid. And when we look at the realities on the ground, the question is, what must we do differently from an energy security point of view? And also, perhaps you want to dimension this along the whole decade of gas objectives. It would be great to hear your views in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Madam. It's an absolute pleasure and a delight to be on this webinar today. I think that this is a very topical issue. Obviously, like we all know, the economic fortune of any nation is closely tied, dependent, and driven by energy security of that nation. So when we look at, like Madam said, when we look at our situation, our current situation as a country and as a continent, we see that we have large state of energy insecurity and energy poverty, and it's driven by a couple of considerations. One, is the fact that, energy unaffordability. And I think that you spoke very largely to the challenges. So I'll just make it very brief. The fact that most of our population in Africa, in Nigeria, do not have access or cannot afford the basic cost of electricity. Of course, you then have the issue of energy inequity, in which case we are talking about the fact that Africa is a community of 1.3 billion people. 600 million of that population do not have access to electricity. In Nigeria alone, about 45% of our population lack access to electricity. That's a major, major challenge. And of course, you talk about energy availability and access. In this case, you're talking about us having a required investment in the infrastructures to take energy from the source point to demand point. Those three major things encompass what has been our major challenge, our perennial challenge under energy insecurity and poverty in Africa. So the question is, why do we have this? We know what the gap analysis is very clearly. We know the level of power generation that we need to get to achieve some form of energy stability. For example, we need to increase our grid distribution capacity by over 10-folds to achieve some level of energy stability. We are talking about energy security. We should be talking about perhaps about 160,000 megawatts of grid power availability to support industrialization and economic growth in Nigeria. So what this means is we need money, obviously. Money here has to take several forms. The first one is, how do we access money in a world that is extremely constrained by access to global capital, driven by two major reasons, like we rightly mentioned, the COVID-19 and the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You are seeing an exacerbated energy inflation, which means that countries are taking a lot of independent energy development ecosystem approach. They want to become independent and less reliant on global suppliers that typically are causing the challenges today. The second one is what we mentioned, the environmental transition, which is underway, which is real and which is realistic and which has to happen. So the question is, how do we access the capital? We need perhaps about $4.5 billion every year from now to 2030 to be able to get to the level of infrastructure requirement that we need for energy security. It means either we can access climate change fund, which is perhaps very unrealistic in the wake of current challenges. Or in the second phase, we start looking inwards to the kind of resources that we have that we can develop efficiently, productively, and we can get them to meet our energy requirement, in which case I'm a natural gas player, so my focus will be on natural gas. Why? Because today, 70% of our power generation capacity comes from natural gas. We have huge gas reserves in the country, over a third of the proven reserves in Africa. If we efficiently develop it, we can get to close the gap that we have very shortly. But we should also look at developing an energy mix, diversifying our energy supply source, such that we can also incorporate other elements of sources that can help us ultimately get down to an environment where our production, our generation becomes exciting from an investment landscape.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Olakunle. And that's gas conversation. Obviously, we're going to have to come to that because even within the energy transition plan, there's a clear acknowledgement of the fact that we're building this base load primarily first by looking at the gas that is available, absolutely, even as we begin to scale further along the line into...
So it has to be just energy transition, and that's very important. The transition has to be just.
Excellent. So now I want to come to you, Afolabi, and talking about the conversation about renewables. So you know that Nigeria had previously set out to achieve 30% renewable energy mix by 2030, right? And yes, we've seen kind of a surge in solar mini grid deployment across the country, usually and primarily in the rural areas. But we've actually not seen any major utility scale solar projects like what we see in Egypt, in South Africa, in Senegal, in Togo. And we have just 7 years to go to 2030. So the question is, how do we realize this ambition? How do we, looking at the infrastructure within Nigeria, energy infrastructure, how do we integrate renewable energy into that? Is there a need for some kind of a system redesign? How just good to get your thoughts around enabling this renewable energy portion of the energy transition narrative in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the first thing to say again is, I think I spent pretty much the first 10, 12 years of my career in gas. So I really understand both how the gas space works and of course the renewable energy space works. And it's also clear to us pretty much that where we are in Nigeria, we are not in a place where you have an either-or situation. We are so far down as a country where the average Nigerian on a per capita basis gets about 1/15 of what the average Ghanaian just 2 doors down gets. And God knows just about 1/40th of what the average South African gets. Don't even go down to what occurs in the western part of the world. So we are so far down, there is so much even if we double or triple our capacity in the next, over the course of the next 3-4 years, it will still end up being a drop in the bucket. So there is still so much scope for us to actually increase what needs to be done. So I think really in terms of solving the problem of the power space within Nigeria is number one, look at what are the short-term gains. What can you quickly do in the short term to solve our challenges? Of course, things are being done with regards to solving, closing a key part of the transmission gap in the country. Let's do a bit more work on that, ensure that a lot of the stranded generation we have in the system right now comes on stream. And then you then look medium and long term, what then do we do to then totally redesign the entire system we have in Nigeria? This centralized, grid-based system which we've had doesn't do us good, doesn't encourage private sector investment in the ecosystem, doesn't engender a system where you can have as many people doing what they need to do to supply, to facilitate power supply to their regions, to their states, to their local government, to their industries, or whatever needs to be done. The size of the pie is so huge in Nigeria that there's no way it can be done by the government. And of course, definitely sitting down and saying the model that we have right now needs to be rejigged. Keep the grid in place, definitely. The grid can continue to do what it needs to do, can continue to be upgraded. But of course, let us now sit down and say, how do we then redesign this entire power generation, power delivery system within Nigeria in such a way that all of the various parts of it, for example, you want to mix renewables into it. How do you get that done? You want to work on, in terms of franchising. How do you get that done? You want to look at, for example, how do you domesticate part of the solar renewable energy value chain in Nigeria? How do you get that done? You want to reduce, for example, cost of RE equipment and input into Nigeria. How do you get that done? How do you ensure also that as a country, what the left hand is doing is not complicating what the right hand side of your hand is doing? You're not having, for example, the Ministry of Finance issuing IDEX, and then you have at the other hand customs, which also has a mandate from the same government to bring in revenue, disregarding those IDEX. So those are the things we need to sit down and coordinate as a country, because what is going to happen is that the world is looking at us, and the world is going to sit down and say, come, I will look at what these guys are doing for another 5, 6, 7, 8 years before I can then put $1 billion or $2 billion or $3 billion into the Nigeria's power space. So really, from the day that we do the right things within our economy to the day that the first tranche of major third-party private sector for funding comes into this space, is going to be anything between 3 to 5 years. So the time that we needed to start doing the right things, instead in terms of putting our power sector on the right tranche, on the right steps, is actually the day before yesterday. So, right. So I think that's about it for me for now.
Thank you so much for that. Now, I need to apologize to the audience, and then particularly also to my next panelist, Dr. Ransom, because actually he was supposed to do, and he will, if you don't mind, sir, just a quick presentation, and I think it will inform also the rest of our discussions. And also to say to the members of the audience that if you have questions, please use the Q&A function and drop your questions, because shortly we will go into round of audience questions from the audience, which the panelists will be very happy to address. If you can also, you can note which specific panel member you are asking the question of. In that regard, I want to invite Dr. Ransom Owan. If you can please share your screen and let's take your presentation very quickly, or if you choose to just speak to it, and then we can go into the question which I think I would love to ask of you, Dr. Owan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't actually have access to share the screen because I'm not plugged in media-wise, but however, thank you very much for this opportunity. Madam, I happen to have the unenviable experience of being around this problem since 17 years ago when the power sector was formed. That Reform Act, I was the pioneer chairman of NERC, and since then I have had a history of doing this type of business. I want to be on record, first of all, to validate that all the problems with the power sector in Nigeria are true and valid. So let's take that out of the way. My conversation will simply be about what this energy ecosystem and the transition is about, and what are some of the issues that I think our panelists can also address, picking up from even what Mr. Afolabi just said. Not to be indelicate, I believe that energy transition is simply a case whereby it is climate change that is driving it, it's a key driver of it, and the response from us thereafter. Once I left the power sector in Nigeria, I'm now the group managing director of ITO, in charge of power infrastructure and mining. So the decarbonization in mining is something I do across Africa, in the battery minerals and elsewhere, which I'm currently doing, and I'm even in another country at the moment. It shows that before we can get anything done, Nigeria is also trying to comply with some of its international agreements. And one is happening now and will be happening. So we have agreements to do, and then we have a regulatory context whereby we can also try to meet our obligations. Where is Nigeria today in terms of the global index of energy transition? The data that I have of all the countries that are listed, Nigeria ranked number 101. And the last person in that group is Zimbabwe at number 115. So in terms of energy transition, we are behind Cameroon, we are behind Zambia and Ghana, and just a tad above South Africa. So that gives us a context that we have a long way to go to even climb up that ladder. It is important for us to think about it because globally, we are about 6 billion today. Nigeria population is growing. Therefore, on the aggregate, we are going to demand more energy. It's a matter of how do we switch from our current mix to a more energy efficient consumption level. I believe that the big picture for Nigeria, as we have said and articulated, as the VP has spoken, that by 2060, which means 38 years from now, we should be net zero in terms of what we have to work out. It means that's less than about 3 decades. It sounds like a long time, but it actually isn't. So the key ingredients, what are the impetus that we have to focus on in terms of our commitment to international community in energy profiling, and the objectives that we have to become data-driven based energy profile so that investors can see we are moving. However, how can it be that we will attract investment into this power sector with all the attendant problems? I said earlier, not to be indelicate, but our power sector is still fractured. I don't need to say that. But also, I believe there's some discordant tunes in the sector. Power generation, power distribution, and transmission, and the government itself. How do I know this? About 2 years or more ago, there was an ERUFI committee to look at deregulation. So I was part of that. And I took on a mission to speak to all the stakeholders in the Nigerian power sector. Guess what I discovered? Nobody has ownership of the power problem. Therefore, if we don't have ownership of the power problem, it's an issue. If you ask me, I believe that the Nigerian power sector is now a systemic problem. And the only way you solve a systemic problem is to have all the actors come together. Because the person who you blame, if let's say we blame the DISCOs, well, the DISCOs cannot solve it. The GENCO said it was not their problem. Yet they have power sectors with nobody, no industries around them. So whose problem is it? And I can't name anymore. So let me just assess it. I don't mean to be indelicate, but I think that what we needed to discuss is how do we come together as a nation to actually solve the power problem? Otherwise, if Nigeria does not solve the power problem, till today, since 1960 to now, there is no city in Nigeria that has power 24/7. That's a non-starter. Therefore, I believe that the absence of a properly structured market that can attract capital for us to now innovate, because we're talking about energy transition, means leapfrogging where we are to more energy efficient and more climate friendly energy mix. That is where we are. If you deal with that issue, you now begin to deal with how do you get to net zero? So the big picture for me is how do you transition, as the aim is 100 million Nigerian citizens out of poverty? That's government pronouncement. Now, the actors in between need to figure out how we can introduce these energy services for economic growth and the limited impact of energy. My colleagues are here from the energy, from the oil and gas sector. We at TEO, we're also in the upstream sector. We are all part of this mix. So I think it behooves us, as this conversation continues, to look into the idea that we need to solve a systemic problem by getting everybody on board and avoid the issue of singing a discordant tune. So, Madam, I think in terms of energy presentation, this is the outlook I have presented here. Needless to say, the echo is there for energy crisis and the global influx of what we have. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ransom. Excellent. So it's a systemic issue, and this is the reality that is before us. So as we talk about energy transition, we must be able to deal with the systemic issue to move forward so that it's not just sound bites. That's very important for us in the context of the country's current realities. So we have like 15 minutes left. I'm going to say something and then put it to all of the panelists actually and get your perspectives based on your different areas of strength, focus, expertise, and of course with a nationalistic view as well. So right now, as we're talking about balancing of energy security against the net zero targets, one of the things that has come up is the issue of investments, mobilizing investments, whether we're looking inward, whether we're looking for green investments and all that. What we know is that for Nigeria to be able to move forward from the perspective of power, from the perspective of renewables, we need to double, triple perhaps our investments in the sector. And as I pointed out at the beginning, right now there's so many moving parts, so many moving parts. One of the speakers had referenced the issue of energy inflation, as everybody now begins to look at how do we secure our own energy on their own domestic front, and Nigeria must be looking at that. So I'm wondering from your perspective, again, practical, actionable suggestions. How do we address the realities of the convergence that must happen between our gas and the energy, the renewables market? That dynamics, we must be able to hit both of those levers at the same time. So from the point of view of security, transition, affordability, access, looking at innovations that are happening, right? How do we attract those investments? What are the critical must-dos? Because we must be signaling to the world the right thing. Some of the things I see that we are putting out are not things we've said, but they're not new things. We've been saying them, just that we've now articulated them in the plan. So what needs to shift? From the power sector, directly Folake, and then Olakunle and Afolabi, and then I'll come back to Dr. Owan before we take in, I see we have a few questions from the audience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Audrey. I think for me, the most important thing is for anyone that wants to invest in anything, whether it's power or anything you want to invest in, I think that you need to have some assurance that you're going to get return on that investment. I think that's one thing. And as such, we've seen there's an opportunity here. We've seen that there's demand, we just don't have enough supply. And what needs to be done on the value chain is very clear. Funding is required. So on a practical level, I think number one is to give comfort to investors. And what are the things today, I would say, I'll give comfort. So I think maybe government has to come up with some form of incentives, right, that will attract the investor who wants to put in money into this sector. I think it's very key. I think it's important that things like maybe have tax waivers, import and duty exemptions on equipment. A lot of, if you look at the value chain, if you look at the discos, we're doing metering, you're bringing in transformers. These are products that are not based in Nigeria. So if you want to attract them, you have to make it affordable. And that brings me to the tariff. Today, we talk about cost reflective. The tariff needs to be able to recover the cost that has been put into making sure that power is available. And such, we need to be very deliberate about making sure that the tariff that is paid by the end user is reflective of the cost. And that gives, obviously, some confidence to either, if it's the bank or an investor, to put in money in this sector. I think another one is creating a strong and transparent legal framework that ensures that they know that not that they go into a contract 2 years, 3 years down the line, that contract is changed. That doesn't build investor confidence. And so I think if we're very deliberate about that, we can definitely attract investment into the sector. But that might be, a lot of people want to bring money, they just need to feel confident that they will recover that money.
All right, thanks. Olakule, your views?
Yeah, so so I think that for us, the priority is to stay on top of the energy transition that is currently underway. And then what that essentially means is that we need to prioritize our current energy requirements as a country in a just, and sustainable way. The first thing I will say is that there is no pathway towards a net zero world by 2060 without fossil fuel decarbonization. And that's very important because to meet our current energy requirements, our world has been dependent largely on fossil fuel for the last 150 years. And essentially we have billions of tons of carbon emissions on an annual basis. So we need to find a way to decarbonize our fossil fuel production process. I go back to the fact that in Nigeria, we're blessed with natural gas. What that then means is that we have to adopt a couple of steps. One is that we have to be capital efficient. We have to adopt capital efficiency in our entire value chain production process. We need to begin to create resilient portfolios that ensures that even beyond the next decade, when the demand for natural gas, and natural gas applications peak, we will continue to have, strong market share in our contribution in the global economy. So we have to ensure that our portfolios are resilient, are cost effective. We have to begin to adopt technologies that decarbonize our gas or natural gas or energy production process all the way down from the upstream to the downstream. One critical technology that we discuss is carbon capture technologies. Today, they become more efficient. We can optimize them. We can incorporate them into our systems, and we have to stay on top of the innovations in that technology. The third thing that I think is very important is, and I think this goes to the macro environment that we operate. We expect that hopefully, we have a much improved political, security, and economic landscape, and even from a macroeconomic standpoint, such that it gives investment confidence for players within our industry, and obviously we can reduce the cost of production of our energy ultimately.
Excellent, thank you for that. Now I'm going to ask Afolabi very quickly because we have just a few minutes left and we must take some audience questions. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much again. I think key thing based on following up for what the previous speakers said, number one, you need macroeconomic stability. If you do not find a way to stabilize the system right now, I think the last few months or a year or thereabout has been pretty challenging for everybody living within Nigeria globally, but of course our own situation has been really, really significant. And then number two, like I've said earlier also, you have to sit down as a country and say, this is not an either-or situation. You can develop your gas, you can optimize your gas resources, you can work on securing the systems which you have right now, making them work efficiently, while also still putting a toe in the world, in the way that the world is going into. So yes, ensure that your gas delivery systems are optimized, ensure that your power system as is right now basically is designed in a manner that works. So that is also very, very critical, while also making sure that you are able to still compete, you are able to do what needs to be done as a country, you are able to do what you need to do to also sit in the committee of and be able to and to be able to also move part of your economy to where it needs to be. For example, there are many parts of this country today where no disco is going to go to. Thank God I have the MD of a disco here. They are part of the country today. We do not make economic sense for a disco to go to. If you want to meet SDG goals, what can we do? How can we design our systems in such a way that needs to be done? And I think also the other key thing is then going to be ensuring that the rules of the road are maintained and enforced in Nigeria. That is a major challenge we've seen pretty much. Somebody told me a few years ago that a contract is like a suggestion in Nigeria. Once you don't feel comfortable again with it again, you don't enforce that. That needs to be done both by government and by parties in the ecosystem.
Thank you very much for that. All right, Dr. Wan, I know I just want to really ask you this question. You've been in this system for so long. I mean, when we think about the Mambila hydroelectric projects, yes, everybody smiles, and I understand that this is something conceived as far back as 1972. But this is something that is actually already, in a sense, largely energy transition compliant. And so, what are your thoughts? How can we really make this project work? Because it can help us significantly on this journey to net zero and our energy security. What are your thoughts, sir? How can we make it work?
Thank you, madam. That is a banana peel question. So I'm not going to hold brief for the FGN, except that I will not avoid the question either. I think, Madam, the issue is about opacity in the power sector. There is information asymmetry. So investors don't have the same information where the practitioners have. Therefore, even attracting money to come to that sector, even for Mambila itself, there is no line of sight. There is no exit strategy. Therefore, if you're going to invest in this sort of project, and yes, this Mambila has been around since maybe 1950, mid-1950s, it hasn't got. I believe that we need to close this information gap. Otherwise, you still suffer from lender apathy. Because you have lender apathy, there's nobody who's going to bring money to the sector. Why? It is clear what NBED is paying is published information. You can go back to the beginning of NBED. You can see the payment issue, the intervention from the CBN and everything is now people are beginning to understand. Therefore, whether you're going to the renewables, I believe at one time Nigeria signed about 10 energy PPAs for solar. Not one was executed till now. We live in the equator. How much sunshine? How much do we have in gas? So it is not the issue of availability of assets to develop. But Madam, I want to put myself in place to say that until this information asymmetry is closed and there is confidence and a line of sight for investment, otherwise Nigeria is not a destination for foreign or domestic direct investment in the power sector. Therefore, the thing to do is how do we, because if you solve the systemic issue, you'll be able to de-risk the power sector. So my contribution is we need to de-risk the sector. It is too risky for investment now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So it really comes back to this place because we know that the government does not have the resources to do all the things that are projected within the ambit of the energy transition plan, even at this point in time, much less into the future, especially looking at the macro environment. And it's a big issue around the systemic nature of the challenges, bringing everybody to the table. And as you've pointed out, investors being able to have clarity of information and especially an exit strategy. Thank you for that. And I think that affects all the other basket of things we've talked about today. So very quickly, I will go to the audience. Oladoyin Phillips is asking Mrs. Shoeton a question, but I see she's typing a response. So perhaps in the interest of time, I will go to some of the other questions right now. Femi Ojumo is saying, how best can the panel advance the case for reducing regulatory burdens in the power sector to better enhance the likelihood of investor participation in alternative power? Dr. Owan, this question is directed to you.
Thank you very much, Madam. I think the issue of regulatory certainty is very important in the power sector. I think that because this act was passed in 2015, it is a good time now for the regulator to perhaps look at how to be specific in driving certain interests and putting regulation that will attract investors to come in. If the regulator is viewed as being impartial and will go strictly by the ambit of the law, I think it's going to be done. But if the invisible hand is seen as playing a factor, either in the reversal of roles or in not adhering to certain contract issues, it becomes a problem. I think that the regulator needs to look at new technologies and change. If we had a particular model of revenue recovery, why are we still sticking to the same revenue recovery? We can think about other things, and the law allows the regulator to tinker with how revenue can be recovered. And the issue of recovery is very important to attract investment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Excellent response. So we have a question from Ijoma Onwodi. Actually, no, this is from Felix Aremo, Tetracore. And he says energy poverty is undoubtedly high in Nigeria, but what you hear most of the time is the need to invest in infrastructure to boost the energy levels. And that's a supply side conversation. So his question is, how do you reconcile affordability of the populace given the low per capita income and effective demand that will then translate to returns on investment? Olakunle, I'm going to throw that to you, if you can respond to that.
Okay, so that's a good question. I think that it all goes down to a couple of points. One, that we should strengthen our value chain. And that goes to the earlier point that I made, which is capital efficiency and capital discipline. We want to ensure that we can reduce the unit cost of our production across the value chain in such a way that we can deliver our energy at an extremely cheap and affordable cost to the populace. We know that in Nigeria, we have to distinguish between our markets, even though we have a huge market, 200 million people. But the effective market is the market indeed that talks about the ability of people to actually pay for the cost of electricity. So we need to expand the basket of our effective markets by ensuring that we reduce our cost of production, become cost efficient, and then ensure that our value chain is connected and works together.
Excellent point. You know, the thing I always think about when this kind of questions come is, you know, I think there's also need for a sensitization. Our reality is that we don't manufacture anything. Everything is going to be imported to support. I mean, the whole investment narrative is the dollar conversation, and we know what the dollar is doing now. And so for a private sector person coming in, you know, how do you balance off this other part of the low income? Now, when we bring in more people, the hope is that as more people are there and competitive forces, you know, come into play, then some of these things start coming down. And government's role is really to provide that social security safety net in the process, rather than looking for the investor to provide it. All right, well, out of time really, but I want to take this one question and to say to those others who have asked questions that if it's okay with you, if you don't mind, I'm sure that the Institute will be happy to send your questions to the panelists. And I know the panelists will also be very happy to articulate responses and share. So Folake, I'm going to just end with this question to you. Oladoyin Phillips is asking, how open might DISCOs be to participating in the proposal of undergrids for underserved communities, whereby mini grid operators provide the power, but they use the distribution infrastructure for a fee, and they will be responsible for all the commercial activities such as billing and collections. Would you like to speak to that, please?
Oh, we are fully open to that. Today, mini grid agreements for power generation from solar sources, and we plan to even sign more before the end of the year. We're also actively looking to collaborate with more developers to help us achieve this objective. It's very key and very important. There is no way we can achieve this objective of, you know, a decrease or increasing energy access if we do not partner. We're very open to it. We're extremely.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, because of time, I'm going to have to wrap up the panel at this session, at this time, however, but I think it's been a fantastic session. I want to thank all my very eminent panelists for their insights, for their experience, and their contributions.
Have you done it?
Somebody needs to mute. Somebody needs to mute. Chairman, can you mute, please? Okay, thank you. There was a bit of an echo. Now, we have touched on the narrative around the power sector. We recognize that there are structural challenges. There are challenges around information opacity. There are challenges around the need for investors to have an exit strategy and understand exactly what they're dealing with. We have said that there are some imperatives that we must be looking at as a nation and as a people. One being that we want to ensure that we are progressing the narrative around renewables as much as we are doing gas and other resources that we have. It's not an either or. We recognize the fact that the investment that is going to be required is significant, and there is need for us to tap all the various options that are available to us within and outside of the country, looking also at green finances and the rest. We recognize that there are infrastructure challenges, there are policy challenges, but there are actually actionable steps that can be taken for us to be able to move forward on the transition pathway so that we can ensure energy security for the country. But what is important is that all hands must be on deck, government and private sector, to ensure that we don't continue the same narratives and every year ending with sound bites, whereas we're not moving forward. Because right now the nation is in dire need of energy for development. And yes, I see the president has posted something, systems thinking, that is critical. So in summary, I just want to say that I think it's been an excellent conversation. and that's the private sector, as I see it, championed here by the Institute of Directors, is willing, able, and available to partner with the government in making sure that we hit our aspirations for net zero. It's going to take a lot of work, but the commitment is there. And what we're now looking for is that support, enabling environment, regulatory and legislative, to ensure that we can make all these things to work. That said, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's been my honor to moderate this panel. Please help me to appreciate my panel members. And Mr. Chairman, I will hand over the panel or the program back to you at this point in time. Thank you very much. Thank you, panel members. I appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. Excellent and very well done. We learned quite a lot from that session. And I could see that we had more than 10 questions, and we really can't answer all of them in the time. In fact, 12 questions now, just checking the number counts. And there are more than 100 of us in this forum, which is very, very nice. By way of recap, by way of closing remarks, quite a lot of items came, particularly from Mr. Dr. Onwan, who has been in this for God knows how long. But I'm a little worried about the statistics. Number 101, Nigeria is the 7th most populous country in the world. So that's counting from the top. Now we're counting from the bottom. We're number 101 in terms of energy transition. I think if there's going to be one take home for the vice president, that should be one. But I think he has to take home. How do we move from 101, move up? And if we even fully execute our ETP, will that take us up? And how fast will it take us up? And we have predicated most of our things on external financing, that the polluter should help us finance our plan if they want us to fast track. Is that a viable option going forward? And then the other point made too by Dr. Onwan, which I think needs emphasis, is discordant tunes, no ownership of the power problem, and then some of the problems are systemic. But the most worrying, our existing structure cannot attract capital. That for me is extremely, extremely important. You just have to, I mean, I raised lots of billions of dollars for this country, but we did that because we had structure. If you don't have the right structure, then you can't even raise $1. So how do we get this structure to be able to raise the sort of sums we require to raise? So there's going to be a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure the Institute going forward will need to put at least a position paper arising from this, where we would share with government and as our contribution as an institute to helping make sure that we do two things: make sure that our power sector will move not from where we are, but to where we want to be. And we need to actually make our existing structure work. We have plenty of structure. NBET is not working. Why can't we make it work? We must be faithful to the structures we create than just creating structures and not making them work. I think those are some of the big points I can get. And I'm sure if I ask all of you from all the several questions we're getting, definitely there are big questions out there. But it's not enough to generate the questions. We have to solve the problems, and then we have to move the country and Nigeria and the industry forward. If we do that, then we might even achieve our energy transition before 2060 if we just get the right things done. And I'm sure before I ask Sunday Adekbekun to say the vote of thanks, it would be nice to hear my president and chairman of council say one or two things, after which we'll take the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eromosele, for your summary, and also to the institute moderator and panelists. I think the main thing I would like to take here is the place of talent in all these. All this is about talent, getting the right people in the right place. And when I mean the right people, I mean in terms of not only technical abilities, also in terms of ethical values. And that's why we at the Institute of Directors come in You know, we need to get the right people at the right place. It's not about politics. It's about doing the right things the right way. And again, the systems approach to leadership and management come here. From what you have said, there are complexities that people have to delayer, and delayering it dispassionately and objectively so that we can get to the root of this. It's actually very shameful that decades upon decades, we are not able to have our hands firmly on this problem and solution. Thank you very much. So it's a challenge to us all to do the right things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So at this point, without further ado, can I ask Sunday Adenikpekun, who is the director of IOD Academy, to give us the vote of thanks?
Thank you so very much, sir. And at this juncture, I want to appreciate each and every one of us who have been on this program today. And let me start by first and foremost thanking profusely His Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, for the honor that he had done, the Institute by coming, in the person of the Director of Renewable and Rural Power Access Department, Engineer Abubakar Ali Dapshima. Thank you so very much, sir. We appreciate that insightful keynote address, which gave a lot of insight into the energy transition plan. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the President and Chairman of the Governing Council of IOD Nigeria, Dr. Mrs. Ijidema, FIOD, for hosting this particular program. Madam, we want to thank you so very much for always giving opportunity for us to have this type of insightful program. Of course, many of us have learned so much on the program today. The issue of power is an issue that concerns everybody. But with what I have learned here today, I do know that there is hope for Nigeria in this space. Thank you very much, ma'am. I want to seize the opportunity to appreciate especially the moderator of this event, Mrs. Audrey Jo Ezigbo. She has done it so fantastically, and honestly, it has been seamless and so timely too in all the segments. Thank you very much, ma'am. Really appreciate your presence. I cannot but thank enough the panelists who had, been very, very contributory today to the conversation, and they have brought a lot of perspective to bear. First on the list, I want to appreciate Mrs. Folake Shueton, the CEO Ikeja Electric PLC. Thank you very much, ma'am, for opening our eyes to the depth of investment and funding that is needed in this sector. I want to believe that furthering this type of conversation, we'll find solution to that as a collective body. All stakeholders truly have roles to play. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you for your time. And I'd like to especially recognize and appreciate Mr. Afolabi Akinrogunde. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and the insight that you have added, especially with regards to the fact that the entire gamut of power generation and delivery in Nigeria should be coordinated. We should be seen as a coordinated body to be able to attract funding, and so many other thoughts that you added. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure that when we call you next time, you will still answer us. Really appreciate your time. And of course, Mr. Olakunle Williams. Mr. Olakunle Williams, we really appreciate you. Thank you very much. We know that there's no doubt that you have brought a lot of experience to bear in the discussion. And should this discussion extend beyond this time, we are sure of getting more from you. But we leave that till another time. Thank you very much, sir. And well, Dr. Owan is well, I don't know, very robust person with vast experience in the industry. The last time we met was a few years back, and he sat me down to lecture me on the industry. I can still not remember, so I can't forget many of the things that we discussed. Sir, it's an honor to have you on this program today, and we look forward to more of such opportunity, because the country will still profit the more from your wealth of experience. Thank you very much for coming on this program. And of course, I cannot but mention specifically the chairman of the Energy and Power Committee of IOD Nigeria, Mr. Victor Eromosele, FIOD, who himself is an industry player and very knowledgeable and experienced in the industry, an author of many books, on the industry. And of course, he has given us this opportunity, to have conversation around very important subject, energy transition and the power sector in Nigeria. I must say, sir, that you have done so marvelously, and we cannot thank you enough. Please, with this, this is going to task you the more for more of this opportunity. And I'm sure I have the permission of the president to say that. Thank you very much. We are excited and enriched by what you have facilitated. We really appreciate it. To the rest of us, I want to thank all of us for finding time to be on this program. Honestly, it's a continual discussion until we really achieve that net zero carbon whatever. It is something that we need to continue to discuss, and all stakeholders need to come together. So all of us who are on this program today, we are all stakeholders, and we need to find a way of contributing our own quota, no matter how little it is, to progress this discussion and to find solutions to many of the challenges that have been raised. So it's my honor on behalf of the Institute to thank all of you for finding time to come on this program. We trust that when next you are invited to a program like this or another webinar or physical program that IOD will invite you for, you will find time to attend. We really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. God bless you. Thank you.
And have a good day.
So I guess at this juncture, we will have to take the national anthem as we wrap up the event. Yes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.